The movie begins in Kenya amid a devastating attack. Chaos takes over the city. Buildings in ruins, streets covered with smoke, and the sound of explosions that seem endless. People run desperately, trying to escape something that is destroying everything around them. At the center of this destruction, a combat group advances. The situation is hopeless, and the city seems lost. In the midst of this chaotic scene, a U.S. Air Force helicopter attempts a risky maneuver to intervene. The helicopter loses control and crashes, exploding upon hitting the ground. The explosion is so powerful that the soldiers are thrown away. The mission's captain is one of the last to lose consciousness, his body consumed by pain and darkness. When he finally regains his senses, he finds himself in an improvised prison, his body still aching and a strange sensation, as if electricity is coursing through his veins. He doesn't understand where he is, nor what happened to his team. His thoughts are confused, and he is forced to explore his surroundings. By pushing some bricks, he has a terrifying vision. The captain, however, can't remember his own name, and the anguish of not knowing who he is consumes him. In his desperation, he screams, asking to be freed so he can help others. But then, a female voice interrupts his screams. The woman, irritated by the noise, tells him to calm down. She introduces herself as Nadia, a French doctor who is in Kenya to finish her studies. Nadia explains that they were both captured by a group of insurgents who are keeping them prisoners to exploit their skills. Nadia tries to understand more about the captain, but he is lost, with no memory of what happened to him or his life. While they talk, a group of insurgents arrives, discussing plans to kill the prisoners. The captain understands the local language, which gives him an advantage. He tries to negotiate his release, but this only irritates the insurgents, who drag him out of the cell, determined to execute him first. However, the captain reacts quickly, delivering precise strikes and taking down the enemies one by one. Amid the chaos, he grabs one of the men, and with an agile leap, both fall out of the window. The fight continues outside, but the captain is determined to survive at all costs. Meanwhile, in the cell next door, insurgents threaten Nadia, but she, in addition to being a doctor, is trained in self-defense. Without hesitation, she disarms one of the men, and with the weapon in hand, takes down the others. Outside, the captain continues fighting. One insurgent tries to attack him with a weapon, but he takes it and uses it against the enemy. When it seems like the situation is under control, another insurgent appears with an electric weapon. The captain, by instinct, grabs the weapon with his hands, but something strange happens. He feels the electricity coursing through his body without harming him. To everyone's surprise, it is the insurgent who receives the shock and dies instantly. A new enemy emerges. A giant robot equipped with cutting-edge technology rises from the mist with the purpose of hunting humans. The robot scans the area, focusing on the captain, but does not attack them. It seems to be looking for other humans, leaving them, for now, out of danger. The captain cautiously exits the vehicle and heads toward the prison, where Nadia is still waiting for him, in silence. As he approaches, he insists they leave together, saying that staying alone would be a mortal risk. The insurgents had been eliminated by Nadia, but the threat was still real. They needed to move on, and their only chance of survival would be to stay together. As they prepare to leave, Nadia asks again for the captain's name. He hesitates and responds sincerely, "I don't remember anything." Hello, my dear friends. This is the summary of the movie, Revolt. I hope you're enjoying it. Comment sensational so we know you've been paying attention to every detail of the video. Now let's continue. Looking at his uniform, Nadia sees a partially burned tag with the letter B visible. Without thinking, she says, "Bo." He looks at her, puzzled, but agrees. Bo is fine since I don't remember anything. Armed with the weapons of the fallen terrorists, Bo and Nadia begin their journey. Bo suggests going to the American military base, believing it would be a safe place. Maybe there are still survivors there, he says with hope. Nadia, however, shakes her head and responds coldly. The base was destroyed, along with other human facilities, by the alien robots. She explains that the invaders, machines from another world, attacked Earth to eradicate humanity and dismantle its buildings. Bo, still determined, refuses to accept that everything is lost. "I'm going there to see it with my own eyes. Maybe there are still some people alive." Reluctantly, Nadia agrees. "All right, let's go, but don't expect a miracle." They take a military vehicle left behind by the insurgents and begin the journey. The road is uncertain, full of dangers and ruins, but Bo's hope keeps them moving forward. Nadia, though skeptical, decides to trust him, at least for now. On the way, they are caught by a barrage of gunfire. They drop to the ground seeking cover. When the shooting subsides, they realize that the attackers are Kenyan soldiers who mistook them for enemies. Bo tries to explain, raising his hands. "We're not enemies." However, one of the soldiers notices a tattoo on Bo's arm, and immediately, the situation changes. One of the soldiers tries to attack Bo, but he quickly grabs the weapon from a fallen soldier and neutralizes him. Armed and alert, Bo demands answers. One of the soldiers, now more cautious of Bo's abilities, breaks the silence. He explains that Bo's tattoo is a symbol associated with a faction of American soldiers on the other side of the border. These Americans are suspected of possessing advanced technology and are believed to be responsible for the robots that devastated countries like Kenya. This group is considered the creator of chaos, and the Kenyans hate them, blaming them for the destruction. Bo denies the accusations, his voice firm and indignant. "My companions and I would never do this," he says. "We are not enemies." Determined to discover the truth, he insists that he is not on the side of the oppressors. After a brief discussion, the Kenyan soldiers allow Bo and Nadia to proceed, but warn them, "Be careful where you walk." They continue their journey in their car and soon arrive at an area heavily guarded by electric wires, an attempt to stop the robots. As they advance, a giant robot appears and starts chasing them. Bo speeds up. The electricity doesn't affect the car or them, as if they were immune. They are intrigued, but there's no time to think, as the robot is right behind them, relentless. When the car breaks down, Bo and Nadia are forced to flee on foot, seeking shelter in a construction site. The robot, now closer, begins to scan the area. As they hide, they spot a man and his young daughter, also trying to escape. Their sight awakens a protective instinct in both of them. They know they can't leave them at the mercy of the robot. They decide to intervene and come up with a plan to eliminate the threat. Exhausted, Bo and Nadia watch in horror as the robot mercilessly kills the father. The machine then turns its attention to the girl. Nadia, unable to bear it, fires her weapon to draw the robot's attention. The robot shifts focus to Bo, but surprisingly retreats and leaves the area. Bo and Nadia remain paralyzed, their hearts heavy, as they watch the robot kill the little girl before their eyes. As they walk, trying to process what they just witnessed, they hear voices coming from a nearby house. Hoping to find survivors, they enter cautiously but soon discover that the voices are coming from a radio. It was a trap. Before they can react, a group of armed locals ambushes them, quickly overpowering them and chaining them up. The locals seem to have a plan, use them as bait to lure the robot back to this area, where they intend to attack it. Soon, the huge robot reappears, followed by another smaller one, but equally deadly. The air fills with gunfire and explosions as the locals attack, focused on bringing down the machines. However, the second robot, faster and armed, begins to retaliate. The confrontation intensifies, and the locals are decimated by a barrage of electric shocks and projectiles. Amid the chaos, Bo remains unharmed by the electric attacks, an inexplicable phenomenon, but he doesn't have time to understand it. Taking advantage of the confusion, Bo manages to free himself and Nadia from the chains, and the two run through debris and fallen buildings until they find a massive, partially destroyed bridge spanning a deep gorge. With the robot still on their tail and the bridge offering little cover, survival seems uncertain. As they hide under the bridge, trying to escape from the robots, a faint sound catches their attention. Upon investigating, they find a wounded photographer, bleeding heavily from a gunshot wound. The man on the brink of death still wants to share something important. With trembling hands, he shows Bo and Nadia a series of photographs and videos on the camera. The images reveal the destruction caused by robotic alien invaders. The photographer explains that these aliens have one goal: to eradicate humanity and take control of Earth. He risked his life to document everything, hoping to incite a resistance among the survivors. Suddenly, distant explosions shake the ground, and fear spreads among them. The man, barely able to stand, reveals that he doesn't believe he will survive his injuries. With a weary look, he begs them to take his camera and use the evidence it contains to unite the remaining resistance forces. He asks them to end his suffering. Initially, Nadia and Bo are horrified by the idea, trying to convince the photographer to fight for his life, but he becomes agitated, insisting that the pain is unbearable and that he can't continue. With heavy hearts and struggling against their own repulsion, they fulfill his request. In silence, Bo and Nadia grant him the peace he so desperately asked for. Before leaving, they take the camera and vow that his sacrifice will not be in vain. With sadness weighing on them, they move forward. The robots were destroying everything, erasing any trace of civilization, as if they wanted to wipe out even the memory of those who had lived there. The only hope was to reach a military base they believed was still operational. Along the way, they find an abandoned car that is still working. They decide to use it to move forward, navigating through the ruins of a world that no longer seemed to exist. As they approach a mountainous area, the car's radio begins emitting a strange noise, a mix of distorted frequencies. Bo tries to adjust the device, trying to discern something useful. Maybe it was just static, or maybe a message. Nadia wonders if it could be a trap. Despite the doubt, Bo refuses to give up. Any clue, no matter how risky, could mean a chance to find allies or answers. They were increasingly convinced that the robots were a much more complex threat, with technology that surpassed anything humanity had ever known. Suddenly, the sound of loud explosions echoes in the distance. The army of robots approaches, immense and relentless. With their hearts racing, Bo and Nadia jump into the car and speed off, trying to escape. But the speed and number of robots are overwhelming. Desperate, they drive to a nearby house and hide. The chaos outside continues, with the horrible sounds of destruction and movement, until finally, the army of robots moves away. For a moment, everything fell silent. Believing they were finally safe, the captain and Nadia allowed themselves to relax for a moment, until suddenly, a deep and violent tremor began to shake the ground beneath their feet. It wasn't an earthquake, but the magnetic force of a gigantic alien robot spaceship, which, with colossal strength, was pulling them into its spacecraft. The captain grabbed Nadia with all his might, trying to prevent her from being taken, but his effort was in vain. Nadia was pulled into the ship, while he was thrown backward, falling from a considerable height. The impact of the fall was brutal, leaving the captain severely injured. He lay there, dazed and with his leg damaged, as the ship disappeared into the sky, taking Nadia with it. With pain and an overwhelming sense of loss, the captain did what he could to heal himself, wrapping his wounds with whatever he had on hand. With difficulty, he began his journey to the military radar station, hoping to find some refuge or help. After hours of travel, the captain finally arrived at the station, but the scene he found was one of pure despair. The station was completely destroyed. There was no sign of life, neither from his comrades nor from survivors. Wandering through a nearby city, the captain found some survivors, a small group that possessed weapons that seemed effective against the robots. The city was a battlefield, with explosions and gunshots echoing in all directions. The fight was lost for many, and the captain's condition only worsened over time. With his injuries worsening, he sat down to rest. It was then that he began to be surrounded by robotic creatures resembling spiders, moving rapidly toward him. But to his surprise, after scanning him, the machine stopped and retreated, leaving him unharmed. Exhausted, the captain passed out right there, in the middle of the destruction. When he woke up, he found himself in a strange place, a secret base where the survivors of the city had taken refuge. There, his wound was treated, and he learned that these survivors were developing advanced weapons to fight the robots. The captain began to recover his memory, and little by little, he remembered who he was and how he got there. The captain followed some of the survivors to an engineer's workshop. There, the man explained that they had developed electromagnetic pulse, EMP weapons, with such destructive power that they could destroy any robot. These weapons worked by storing kinetic energy and releasing it all at once, creating a cannon capable of taking down the relentless invaders. The main goal of these weapons was to destroy the alien spaceships as they controlled the robots. While listening, the captain noticed that the engineer had studied the robot parts, identifying their weaknesses. During the explanation, the captain had a flashback. He remembered a past battle when a robot grabbed him and inserted something into his mouth. It was the moment when he finally understood. The robots never attacked him because they always freed him after inserting a device into his body. This explained their unusual behavior towards him, an action that, in retrospect, seemed to have been planned. At that moment, the engineer interrupted the captain's thoughts, warning about a large group of robots approaching the base. The captain, confused, couldn't understand how the enemies had found the secret location. It was then that the revelation hit him hard. The device the robots had inserted into him was, in fact, a tracker. He was now a ticking time bomb, guiding the robots directly to them. With the truth revealed, the captain explained what he had discovered to the others. One of the women, furious and scared, tried to shoot him, blaming him for exposing the base. Determined to avoid disaster, the captain proposed a risky plan. He suggested that he and some members of his team leave the base, while the rest use the EMPs to block the robots. This way, the robots wouldn't be able to locate them directly. However, The danger was still imminent. During the execution of the plan, the robots changed direction, but one failure could mean the death of everyone. That's when a massive explosion shook the ground, caused by one of the team members prematurely activating the EMP. The alien ships had detected the base's location and were sending an army of robots. The explosion severely injured one of the team members, and soon the robots began eliminating the others one by one. In a desperate act of courage, the injured woman asked the others to flee and destroy the ship, while she stayed behind, facing the robots alone. Inside a tunnel, the woman faced a swarm of robotic aliens. In her desperation, she activated the grenades she had hidden on her body. The explosion was massive, wiping out all the robots around her. Outside, the captain and the engineer observed the enemy spaceship, looking for a way to attack it. The situation was dire. Robots had captured hundreds of people, forcing them to work as slaves, with no chance of escape. The captain and the engineer knew that if they didn't act quickly, those prisoners would never have a chance to escape. They carefully aimed at the robots and fired, creating an opening for the imprisoned people. A large explosion devastated the area, creating absolute chaos. The robots, now even more aggressive, began killing anyone who crossed their path. When they attacked a human, the person was instantly vaporized. Meanwhile, the captain and the engineer faced a technical problem with the EMP machine. It started malfunctioning, and the engineer, desperate, tried to fix it. But the battery was damaged, and there wasn't enough power. They were out of options, and the captain watched helplessly as so many people died. However, in the midst of that desperate situation, an idea occurred to him. He remembered a past battle when a terrorist attacked him with an electric weapon. On that occasion, the captain grabbed the terrorist's weapon, causing the enemy to electrocute himself. This memory gave him a risky idea, but his only chance to save those who remained. He concluded that, since the tracker in his body made him immune to electricity, it might be possible to transfer electricity from a robot to the EMP machine. With no other alternative, the captain decided to risk his life. He placed the EMP machine in front of him and touched the body of a robot that emitted high voltage. The shock was intense, but he persevered. Electricity began to flow from the machine to the robot, and finally, the energy was enough to activate the EMP. The engineer quickly activated the machine, which emitted high-frequency waves, destroying the robots in the blink of an eye. The spacecraft was also devastated, collapsing in an impressive way. The EMP proved to be a total success, eliminating the robotic threat once and for all. When the captain finally opened his eyes, still stunned by the shock, he saw that humanity had been freed, and thus, the movie ends. If you liked this movie, I recommend watching this other one as well. I assure you that you'll enjoy it. See you there.